everybody, it is Sean Gibbons from the Communications Network. Welcome, very happy to have you with us. We have about, almost 700 folks signed up to be with us today. So for the next couple of minutes, I'm going to yak at you in part because, as you all know, it takes a minute for Zoom to load everybody into the room. So we're going to start as we always do. If you've been to a network webinar before, this should sound familiar. That slide tells you everything you need to know. We're going to do what we call a two-word check-in. You're going to type in your name, where you are, and then how are you doing in 2 words. I'll model it for you. And as soon as I do, then everybody in, let's see here, if I can type, and there we go. Hey, Natalie. Hey, John. So Natalie, if you would maybe come back to us, type in where you're at and then how you're doing just about now. And for everyone else, feel free to hop in here. It's nice to see each other. Rebecca, Abigail, Baltimore, hot and humid. Hey, Lisa. Hey, Dan. Surviving in Ann Arbor. Tell me it's not warm up there too. Hey, Carrie, New Jersey. Hey, Carrie in Portland. Sarah, Stephanie, Shireen, Julie, Janice. Okay, now starting to go really fast, but lovely to see y'all. You know, one of the cool things about this gang is you can talk to each other during the course of the webinar. And if you have something to add, that's what this chat is for, not just to say hello to one another, but maybe you have a resource to share or 2 cents to put into the conversation, whatever it may be. Help each other out. That's part of what we're trying to do here across this next hour. All right, while y'all are continuing to say hello to everybody, hey, Natalia in Denver, April, Dawn, Laura, everybody else, let's go ahead. I'm going to tell you a couple things we got cooking here at Network HQ, and then I'm going to hand it over to our friends. And you're here, just to remind everybody, you're here for a conversation about how to use inclusive imagery for social sector work. So you're working at a foundation, nonprofit, or perhaps a consulting firm that supports those organizations. And we're going to talk about why imagery is so important and why it's so important to think about who's represented in those pictures. But first, this is something you probably noticed by now if you're a fan of the network or part of our orbit. We will be hosting a big conference, as we always do each year. This year we are moving. Last year we were in Seattle, this year Atlanta. Latasha Brown is going to be there. Who else is going to be there? Judy Belk and Richard Tate, the outgoing and incoming CEOs of the California Wellness Foundation. Who else is going to be there? Heather McGee, our friends from StoryCorps, just a whole host of wonderful folks. Here's the thing, we're running out of tickets. Probably won't surprise you. Always happens, especially around this time. And so if you would go ahead and get registered, we hate to turn people away. Inevitably, we do. 200 folks last year got stuck on what we call the dreaded wait list for Seattle. Don't let that be you. We will close registration August 7th, no matter what. But chances are, just based on where we're looking at numbers, we're going to see registration close probably a little bit earlier than that. So if you're on the fence or you're waiting for approval, please move forward. And if you're in a pinch, shoot us an email. We're happy to set aside a seat for you if you've got some little piece of business you need some help with. Okay, with that, let's move along. Next thing to tell you is we sent this out yesterday in the newsletter, and we'll send you a reminder next week, the Jones Award. We've been giving this out now for the last 5 years. This is year 6 for us. We have some wonderful nominees. You can see them here. They've done extraordinary work, and the award is all about impact. So taking communications work and leveraging it to create a different kind of tomorrow. Something has happened as a consequence of your comms work. And that's what you're seeing here. So if you're looking for some exemplars or examples of folks who are doing really incredible work, you can see Tristan just put this into the link. You can go ahead and vote for your favorite. It's a ranked choice voting thing. And this is really great. It's going to help our judges. We have a wonderful group of folks from the network who are serving as judges, give them some extra input before they name a winner. And that winner will be with us in Atlanta to deliver a case study keynote. If you were with us in Seattle last year, you know the Innocence Project's keynote may very well have been, it was a week of highlights, but that may have been the high water mark for us, was hearing the story of the work that they did organizing across digital platforms, particularly TikTok, to save a man on death row. All right, with that, let's move ahead. Next thing I need to tell you about is, and I'll do this super fast, we have a program called Circles. And the idea is, with 3,000 people in the network right now, sometimes you need to kind of shrink the space a little bit to find that needle in a haystack, which could be people who share your role within your organization. Maybe they're focused on the same issues that you're working on, or maybe they share an identity. And that's what Circles is all about, is shrinking the network to make it more valuable and useful to you. It is free if you're a network member, so avail yourself of that. They gather every day, Slack, and monthly over Zoom to chit chat and check in with one another. And again, Tristan's got a link in there if you want to get involved. Okay, with that, one more, I think we've got locals. Again, y'all know this, there's 16 cities around the country where network members are organizing, because sometimes when you need to borrow a cup of sugar, you're not going to go online and ask somebody, if you're living in Miami, somebody in Portland, Oregon to help you out, but someone who lives a couple blocks away, maybe so. And that's the idea behind locals. There's 2 big local events coming up. Our friends in Detroit have a meetup coming up. I think it's a rooftop thing, which sounds pretty social and fun. And there's the link. And then our friends in San Francisco, a little bit later on, are going to be gathering up all these healthy, friendly, happy folks. So if you would, feel free to get involved. And then last thing I tell you before I turn into a pumpkin for the next little while is we have another webinar coming up in August. We're going to talk about comedy and social good. And so you can see a link here, and we'll send you an invitation to RSVP for that in short order. All right, with that, I've yacked at you long enough, although apparently I did it in a span of about 4 minutes, which is pretty good, right? So suffice to say, Manal Bopaya, Acacia Betancourt, and John Hodgkins are with us, and they're going to talk about inclusive imagery. And thank you, Tristan, in the chat. Just a reminder to everybody, we're going to have a lot of information packed into the next little while. So if you have questions and they're urgent, stick them in the Q&A box here. If not, stick around if you can. We're going to have a whole half hour after this hour together for you to ask your questions directly of everybody who's participating. We call that office hours. There's a link there. Copy and paste that, maybe set that aside for yourself, and then you'll meet us over there. And it's a really wonderful opportunity. We've been doing that for the better part of this year and found it really, really, really helpful to everybody. I'm grateful to our presenters for doing so. All right, with that, Acacia, Minal, and John, please take it away. Oh, and a quick shout out of thanks to Teresa for offering ASL services if you have need and she's not already pinned for you, and she should be, but if she's not, go ahead and pin her up there and you can follow along. There's also a transcript available through Zoom, which y'all know. And if you need any help, shout in the chat and we'll help you out there. All right, gang, see you in a bit. Thanks.
Thank you, Sean. Hi, everyone. This is Minal Bopaya. Thank you for joining us today. I am so excited to be with you all here today and to introduce two really fabulous people to you. Acacia Betancourt, who is our creative director at Brevity and Wit, and Josh Hodgins, pardon me, who is a senior communications manager at NEKC Foundation. And we have a packed day, so I'm not going to talk a lot. What I'm going to do is set this up with the agenda for today. So we're going to start by talking about why inclusive images matter. For those of you who have heard my talks about unconscious bias or implicit bias in marketing and design, this is going to just, build on that knowledge. We're going to do a case study with John on the Kids Count data book that Brevity and Wit designed for the last 2 years. And then Acacia is going to take us through learning how to see images better with the DEI lens, and then the skills that you need to choose inclusive images. And then we're going to have time for questions and other tips and tricks that you all might benefit from. So it is my great pleasure to introduce you all to Acacia Betancourt. Some of you know me. I think those of you who know me best, maybe perhaps for the BIPOC Happy Hour at ComNet last year, which we will repeat this year in epic fashion. And Acacia couldn't be with us that day, but she is here with us now. Acacia is one of the most thoughtful, creative, intentional, inclusive, and joyful people I've ever worked with. And so I couldn't keep her all to myself. I know how much many of you are struggling to bring DEI into the design part of communications, and I couldn't think of anybody better to help navigate you through that journey than Acacia Betancourt. So Acacia, it is all yours.
Oh my goodness, Minal, thank you so much for that introduction. So I'm so pleased to be here with everybody today. I love talking about this and really answering other people's questions and having everybody in community together talking about the images that shape us and that we see every day. So I'm going to start with a little bit of framing for us, and then we'll go into our case study with John. So why are we here? Why do images matter so much? Well, there are a lot of reasons, but basically the images shape our perceptions. Our brains process images a lot faster than they process words. And we are completely inundated with images all day, every day, all of us. This is a statistic that's been cited across the internet, but this number seems quite high to me of, that the average person sees, several thousand ads per day, most of which have images or photographs associated with them. And that's a lot. We see them on billboards and social media and on our TVs and on every website we use. And all of those images together shape our perceptions and shape how we see the world. And like I said, we all are coming to see these images through our own lens, our own perspectives, and from our own identities. We all have biases, and our brains shape perceptions and our first impressions about the people in images in a very, very short amount of time, in 50 milliseconds. And so this is really important. What images we see really shape how we think. So that's really what we're going to talk about today. This is an image of what comes up. This is a very, very famous study when you Google white teenagers. An image of, you know, 3 happy-go-lucky kids, white children that are like arm in arm and very joyful comes up. When you Google Black teenagers, this is what comes up. Very sullen, serious, sort of aggressive mug shots. The quality of the photo is very low. All of this together really works to perpetuate racism, just these images alone. So it really matters because we have the power to change this and to change the perceptions of people. I love this, this author's quote, Carlos Cortez. It's a much longer quote, but the gist of it is basically, minorities realize, supported by research, that the media, which is basically everything that we make, right, influence not only how others view them, but also how they view themselves. So representation and inclusive imagery is really, really critically important for shaping our culture. And as communicators, really, you know, all of us on this call have completely different roles, and we work for different organizations, but we're really fortunate to have the privilege to work in communications. And so we hold power just in the positions that we have at work, but we also have a lot of power to influence. We have the power to influence our organizations, but also our culture and society as a whole. And so today's webinar is really about, you know, there's a lot of talk about these abstract ideas of changing the system and dismantling racism, and these ideas that can be sort of abstract in conversation. And today is about the practical tips about when we are sitting at our desks every day doing our jobs, what do we need to do differently, especially when choosing images, to shape our culture for the better and to make it more inclusive and equitable. So with that, we'll go in. John and I are going to talk about, we're very excited that the Annie E. Casey Foundation just released its 2023 Kids Count Data Book. And this is the second year in a row that Brevity and Wit has designed it in partnership with the Casey Foundation. And we're so excited to talk about it. John?
Yay, thank you very much. Hi, everybody. So first, I just want to talk about what is the data book. Last month, the Casey Foundation published its 34th Kids Count Data Book, started in 1990. And we reproduced the book in partnership with grantees representing every state, as well as DC, Puerto Rico, and the US Virgin Islands. And I like to think of the data book doing 3 things. First, it gives us an opportunity to lift up an important topic with our partners. This year, it was the nation's broken childcare infrastructure. Last year, it was youth mental health. Second, it ranks states on an index of child well-being, almost like a report card, but not a report card. And third, it captures national trends on child well-being. Go to the next slide. So why do we do the data book? The data book primarily helps start conversations, particularly with state leaders and advocates, about how kids and youth are faring and to help decision makers make smart investments and policies. The book also generates significant media coverage, not just in the weeks after its release, but really throughout the year. And while the data book might target leaders and advocates, we get annual requests for the book from libraries, grant writers, faith leaders, students, teachers, and more. The interest in the report shows how communities value this information, and more important, their own children. Next slide. So why does Casey care about inclusive images? First and foremost, we believe that race and ethnicity are central to any conversation about child well-being at the foundation, and that data book is no exception. In fact, the data helps tell the story more clearly. Therefore, images that help represent children and young people from many races, cultures, and communities help reinforce that message of equity and inclusion. The data book includes data from every state in the nation, and our image choices need to give a face to that data and help evoke something in our audiences. And we need to remind ourselves that inclusive images and photos need to include white children and families, which I notice sometimes get short shrift when we try to seek a more diverse set of images. Now, the foundation in 2021 announced that it was directing half of its investments to focus on young people ages 14 and 24. The data book, however, remains a product that focuses on the needs of all children and youth, birth through age 24. And so we count on the images in the data book to signal our ongoing commitment to the success of all children. I think one more, yeah. So working with Brevity and Wit. The foundation first partnered with Brevity and Wit to produce its 2022 Kids Count data book. And so first I want to admit that the pandemic pushed us to rely on stock photographs for the book. So we've continued that practice. In fact, stock photos are a bit liberating in that we can source diverse images without the real struggle to coordinate photo shoots that often capture homogeneous subjects. You know, if we find a program in Florida, it might be only serving Hispanics. So we might have to do 7 to 8 different photo shoots to get the diversity that we might want. And while the foundation has always cared about striking a balance with its photo selection, Brevity and Wit brought a more intentionality and nuance to our work. We went from thinking of just counting photos and balancing, races in our photos to something that we're actively discussing. We've expanded our conversation to talk about LGBTQ representation, about disability, gender, even colorism, and it's turned the data book into a more beautiful and we hope engaging book.
Thank you, John. I love all of that, and it's been such an honor to work on this project. And choosing these images has been such a fun process, both last year and this year. And I'm going to get that was sort of an overview that John gave, and I'm going to get down into the nitty-gritty of how we actually did that. So John and I have collaborated 2 years in a row very, very closely together, had really in-depth discussions about what we want, who we wanted to include, and in what context, and why that was important. So we're going to sort of show off a couple of pages from this year's data book, which you can also download on the Casey Foundation website. So as John mentioned, this is the 2022 book, and we started out with the theme of the book being kids' mental health. Obviously, the last 3 years have been very hard on everyone through the pandemic, but particularly had a really, really hard impact on kids of all ages. So when we really sat down to design the book, the photos we were searching for, we really wanted to center around kids being supported by their parents, by their caregivers, by their friends, their communities, and have it really feel like kids' feelings matter, and what they're going through matters, and that they have support systems around them. So we didn't want to, even though kids' mental health really had been quite bad in 2022 overall, we didn't want to show, kids upset or kids going through struggles. We really wanted to show that support through the images. And that meant spending a lot of time searching for the images that struck the right tone. So like, for example, I'm going to go through some of the images we chose and why. So this young teenage boy sort of outside talking about something with his dad. It sounds like they're having a really in-depth discussion and feeling supported. So I'll go into this a lot later, but we really try to start with who should be centered, what kinds of kids of what identities should be featured in the book, and why. And we really bring those identities to the forefront. So we set out with the intention of featuring someone from an indigenous culture or Native American, and a teenager. And so this young girl on the left, that is, I will say, I have searched for a lot of stock photos, is one of the hardest to find. And when you do look for, Native American kids, they're often very stereotypical. They're in like traditional garb, or they're in, real sort of stereotypical scenarios. It's really hard to find just regular kids and what kids really look like in their everyday. So So we featured this girl on the left, and then we also really like to counteract stereotypes and show kids in doing things and doing activities that are not, typical for their gender role or for their identity. For example, this young boy on the right doing ballet. And then here, like, I love the idea too, the race matters a lot, but as John was saying, inclusivity also includes white people. And this photo on the left features a young kid with Down syndrome and his very sort of like masculine tattooed dad. But we often don't see men, particularly white men, being really affectionate with their kids. And so this image really tells a story of inclusivity and of sort of overlapping identities that really matter. And same with the image here on the right, with a same-sex couple. This little kiddo has two moms, and they're also an interracial couple. So bringing that intersectionality in to the images and really featuring people who look like real families is very important. So that was 2022. And then this year, we really wanted to top ourselves and improve on what we had done in 2022's Kids Count data book. And so while the theme in 2022 was mental health, this year we really just wanted to feature kids being really joyful and getting back to being kids. I don't want to say back to normal, after the pandemic, but after a few really rough years for kids, we wanted it to be very energetic, have kids doing the things that they love and feeling very joyful and active. So last year, the first thing I did was list, okay, who did we feature last year? And who could we feature this year that has different identities than that? So last year there was a young kid with a disability, I think he had MS, with his mom on the cover. This year we featured two kids who are a Black brother and sister outside having fun. So we really try to mix it up year to year. The theme this year too was like really active kids, but it was also very focused on childcare. So at the beginning of the book, we featured a lot of images about caretakers of all kinds, of all different identities, and really centering them in the story and bringing them to the forefront. I will say too, in this page on the left, we had originally had a little girl who was missing one of her forearms. So she had a disability, and her right arm had been amputated. And for sort of compositional reasons, we decided to not use that photo and we needed to switch it out. And John and I had talked about, okay, we very intentionally chosen all these photos and we need to make sure to replace it with an image of another kid with a different disability. So last year we didn't feature any kids with deafness or hearing aids, so we specifically searched for that. Here are a few more images of caretakers, child care workers, with sort of the younger kiddos early on in this year's book. And then as you get further into the book, we feature different types of people, different types of families in all different scenarios. And, like I said, featuring kids being really active, we wanted to show sports and movement and all of that. And I'll get into this in a bit, but, kids that you don't typically see doing certain activities. Families being very supportive and doing things together. And we just wanted it to feel really good and feel like, any one of these pictures could be a real family. We didn't want them to look like stock photos or really posed or fake. And that really added to the authenticity of the book itself. John, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. Two things I want to say about the slides that you just looked at too, were 2 points. Is that one, because the data book is a signature publication, I'm sure other foundation folks understand that, like, the review team on it is really, it's intense. It could be of like 8 to 10 people. And so when we say that we're having a conversation about these photos and inclusion, we're really having it with a very, very large group internally. And so it's a great learning opportunity because, I think that as we keep doing this year after year, those conversations will become easier with organizations. And two, that the Casey Foundation really focuses on strength-based things, like how can we have young people rely on themselves and bring their own resources to solutions. And so I think that the positive nature of all the photos that we selected really align with that. So that was really exciting. And so for if you work in a foundation, I'm sure you know that grantees love to give feedback. And I just want to say that our grantees have really loved the turn that we've taken in the data book. We get a lot of positive feedback. It's a product that they feel really good about sharing with their communities because it might look like their community, and it helps reinforce the good work that they're doing. And so we're really excited about that. So some takeaways, give yourself the time to source images. I think Acacia said that she might have spent, I don't know, 100 hours trying to source the right image of Native American youth. Broaden your approach to representation beyond just race, as we talked about. Don't exclude anyone in your attempt to be inclusive. And your partners and grantees are really going to appreciate the effort that you put into these products. And thanks to Brevity and Wit for the great partnership, and looking forward to what we can do in 2024.
Awesome. Thanks so much, John. It's been great working with Casey Foundation as well. We're super proud of this particular project. So let's get into the sort of practical stuff. I'm going to go through this really quickly, but this is really important to start with. So we'll go into some tips of how I actually got to those images and some sort of things that you could try in your own practices, especially as you look for stock images. And by the way, all of these tips really also apply to video and illustration. But for today, we're really particularly talking about stock images that you may be searching for. So let's start with the foundational mindset of what perspective we actually need to have in order to see all of the subtleties of different images as we're choosing them. So I think if there's one broad takeaway from today, it would be awesome if you just saw images a little bit differently. So while you're moving through your everyday life, looking at images that you see in your environment through this inclusive lens. So we're going to talk about, how these images perpetuate racism and sexism, certain stereotypes about particular communities, and how tokenism can show up. And we do that through using some pop culture images. So to break it down, this is what's called the colorism pyramid. So plainly explained, and I'm a very visual person as a designer, this graphic is really how not just American society, but societies throughout the world have structured themselves. It tends to be that people with lighter skin tones have higher acceptance in society, more opportunity, more get featured more often, more trust often. And then the sort of inverse is true with people with darker skin tones. So the darker skin tones, or the darker a skin tone gets, the less acceptance or centering within society. So that's called colorism. We'll go back to that in just a second. And for the purposes of today, this isn't how I would categorize people in general, obviously, but just to illustrate the point, we're going to talk about people as characters, the people that we see in images. So think about in the images that we see, who are the main characters? Are they white people? Are they people of a different race? And everyone else is sort of supporting characters. And we see this pattern over and over in images throughout pop culture. And we focus specifically on race because it's very visible, right? We can see people's skin tones in images, but also race impacts, like John said, all different dimensions of identity, whether it's age or disability, gender, race all plays a factor in that as well. So the default main character that we see most often is white or light-skinned, thin, typically a thin body type, young, conventionally attractive, right? Non-disabled. Now, not all disabilities are visible, but we typically don't see disabled people featured very often. And straight and cisgender, those are not visible characteristics, but they also sort of take a back seat to heterosexual and cis or other, to other genders. And men are often centered more often than women. So the default main character is essentially this guy. So this is a very run-of-the-mill stock photo, and we're going to break it down. It might seem innocuous, but the subtleties, I think, will surprise you. So the top of the pyramid is essentially this guy. He's the default that we see a lot. This is the full stock image. And let's break down how this photo, which seems very innocent, probably someone searched for, team in the office working and thought that this photo would be, a nice one to use. But it perpetuates white people being at the center and being the main characters, and everyone else being, sort of in the background, literally. First of all, and just talking about the principles of design and composition, the default white man is literally larger in the photo than everyone else compositionally. He is closer to in the foreground and everyone else is in the background. And this subliminally indicates to our brains, talking about, that we make split-second decisions. Our brains are processing information all the time really quickly. This indicates that he's the main character. So he's the most important person in this image. Breaking it down even further, there are 3 people in the background. They are blurry, they're not in focus. They're smaller, and this subliminally tells us that they are less important than the main character. And taking it a step even further, if you look at the 3 people in the background here, the man is just very slightly in front of the 2 other women. The woman who is standing is compositionally above the other woman. She has a lighter skin tone than the seated Black woman. And this really ranks people on that pyramid of sort of lightest skin tone to darkest. It ranks them in terms of gender. And this reinforces racism and all of those structures of society that we're really trying to dismantle. So what are we trying to do? We basically don't want there to be a pyramid. There shouldn't be one. Because the example I always give, if you walk into any airport and you look around, there's every type of person. There is no person who should be centered and everyone else should be a supporting character. We really want the images that we feature, like John was saying, to represent our actual communities and what they really look like as real people. So diversity is reality. It's not some different thing we need to do. Humanity is already very diverse, and that's what we're trying to sort of bring to the forefront. Okay, so let's practice observing images. So I'll go through these, but as you're looking at them, really just think about all of these subtle compositional things that show up in all of these different photos you might recognize. So as you're looking at these, think about who's the main character, who's the supporting character, what types of identities are featured and how are they featured? What's the ratio of white people to people of color? How are the people presented in the photos? And what message is how the photo looks? What message is that sending about race and gender and sexuality and all of these different identities? And also, who's not featured? Who is left out? So here's the first example from pop culture. We all recognize this from Star Wars, pointing out a couple of things that all of the men have weapons, are holding weapons. The only woman is sort of a damsel in distress, and she's sort of submissive to a male character. She's also scantily clad. The 2 center characters, Luke and Leia, are white. The only person of color is behind another white character. And in fact, he's actually smaller than the non-human characters, including Yoda. who gets really centrally featured. And even Darth Vader with his big dark mask is bigger than the woman and the only person of color on the poster. Here's another example from the show Lost, that this is a very heavily produced image, right? So someone intentionally made all of these choices. In fact, a lot of different people play a role in creating an image like this, and made really intentional choices about who to feature and how. So as you can see, the two main characters are the largest. They're also the highest in the composition. These guys in the clouds are also two white guys, and they're sort of larger than life and really centered. And then throughout these teeny tiny characters down here, you have some various identities, like the women are all smaller, they're all lower in the composition. The Black characters, the Asian characters, they're all much, much smaller. And talking about, the intersectionality of identities, you have a Black man in front in this little cluster here, and then a Black woman way smaller and much further behind him. So this is all really reinforcing that pyramid idea that we're trying to do away with. I'll also say too, in terms of who's missing, I don't know this for a fact, but I don't see anyone that racially looks indigenous. There are very few Asian characters. I don't see anyone with a disability. There are very few people with different body types, like larger bodies. So there are a lot of people missing from photos like this as well. The subtleties in this one are the same, right? All of these people in this Banana Republic ad look like they're all in a line at first glance. But then when you break it down further, the two white characters are slightly in front of everyone else. And then you have this white man slightly one step behind them. And then the Asian woman and the Black man are just slightly behind everybody else. Everyone's very thin, conventionally attractive, at least don't have a visible disability, all have the same body type. So this reinforces that as well. Same here of a sort of a blatant centering of whiteness, where you have what's actually a quite diverse cast of different people. You have a trans woman, Laverne Cox, in the cast, but she's sort of serving at least in this image, another white character. And by putting people in, different colors and different compositions, it really perpetuates this centering of whiteness. So the last example I'll give is just look through the lens, this inclusive lens, at any superhero poster, and you'll see this sort of extremely reinforced. So the superhero posters are famous for this sort of like giant heads and small heads. But that is starting to change. And, one of the most famous examples is Black Panther. And you can see how this pyramid sort of gets inverted with something like Black Panther, where the Black characters are sort of larger than life, are very centered, the Wakanda culture is very centered, and the people of different identities, like the white men, get much smaller in this example. And the representation here really, really matters. I'm going to show you a really short video, and then we'll go to some tips.
Like all the time?
So we sitting here looking at this dope ass Black Panther poster, and the conclusion that we have come to is that this is what white people get to feel all the time.
All the time! All the time!
Since the beginning of cinema.
All the time!
You get to feel empowered like this and represented.
This is what y'all feel like all the time? I would love this country too. All the time?
So you can see just by the joy on, that they have of being represented, that the representation actually really matters. Yeah, Minal.
Oh, just a quick time check that we have like 5 or 10 minutes.
Great. Okay, cool. So we'll go through, I'll go quickly through sort of my process of how to search for images. And then I'll give us a resource list and we'll go to questions. So what does our process look like? So going back to the Casey Foundation example, we have a really in-depth discussion with clients about who should be centered and why. And I'll go into this in just a second. We list really specific search terms for the particular theme. And then we spend a lot of time just doing the searching. So before we even start designing, we've spent a lot of time on a bunch of different stock photo sites trying to source the right images. We look at the photos as a group and make sure they're in a thoughtful order. And then that makes, when we're grouping images, it makes it very easy to see who's missing and who we could maybe swap out. This is a screenshot. So we used, I'll highlight iStock because iStock used to not be very inclusive and they have gotten much, much better in the last few years. So shout out to the team at iStock. And even when I'm not working on a project, I will make a free account with different stock photo sites and collect images there. So you can create your free like sort of favorites. And I have, for Kids Count, over 600 photos that I've collected over the last few years that we can pick from. I can share this board with John. We can talk about different options and why we like them. So we have a lot to choose from. So this is a photo of Shutterstock, which is a different stock photo site. They're not as good with inclusion, but I'll say that when you're searching for images, really use the filters. There are a lot of filters on stock photo sites now that you can search by ethnicity, by age, by gender. And the more that you use those and the more specific you get with your searches in terms of search terms and filtering, the better your results you'll get. And if you don't use these, the more likely you are to get very generic results of that sort of default whiteness. So if you're typing something into the search, something like person leading a meeting, that's going to return not so diverse results. The images that will come up first typically look something like this. Now, if you really intentionally think about what you should type in, you type in something like mature Black women leading a meeting because you want to center Black women, especially older Black women who are typically left out, you'll get much, much more rich results. Something like this. So being specific with your search terms is okay, even if it feels a little bit uncomfortable to type in certain identities. So for Kids Count, for the mental health theme, we really used our imaginations and we listed out different search terms and different scenarios that would counteract the stereotypes that we wanted to sort of dispel. So here are some images again from Kids Count that we showed earlier. So when I was searching for these, I typed in things like interracial grandparent, mom having fun with disabled child. I literally am putting this into stock photo sites. And I'm thinking of who would be cool to feature, who usually doesn't get centered or highlighted. Same-sex parents, interracial family, Middle Eastern family playing. It's, when we think of different races, we often think, okay, cool, we'll feature Black people. But there's so many different races and identities to feature that get way less airtime. Muslim teens supporting friends. This one, oops, I missed the title here, but the stereotype of Black dads. I wanted to feature Black dads really being supportive and involved with their kiddos. And I literally typed in family with very dark skin. I wanted to feature sort of the people with the darkest skin tones, like at the bottom of that pyramid I showed, to make sure that they were featured in a really great light. So I use a checklist, and I'll kind of close out with some tips in just a second. And this is not to sort of fill a quota of featuring every different type of person, but this is really more to hold myself accountable and each other accountable to make sure that we've really included a range of different identities. So different races and ethnicities, like we've talked about, a mix of gender. Gender is not just men and women, but more and more, there are more photos of transgender or non-binary people. There are specific websites for people of those identities, stock photo websites that do a great job of that. Ages, older people, babies, physical and mental abilities, and body types. Everybody really looks different. And also featuring people, pregnant people, people wearing religious or cultural clothing, different types of families, and people in sort of like non-traditional job roles. And here's it, feel free to screenshot this if you want. This is, we really like to amplify these websites in particular. And some of them are free. If you have a limited budget for stock photos, some of them are paid, but actually are quite affordable if you look for the right ones. So for Kids Count, we use mostly Pexels, this one on the top left, which many of which are free, or you can get photos for a small donation to the photographer, and an iStock. But a lot of these feature just people with disabilities, just people who are transgender, plus size people, things like that. So there are a lot of smaller stock photo sites now that are doing a great job of diversity and inclusion. 5 quick takeaways. Basically, if nothing else, find opportunities to showcase white people as supporting characters in your images. Be really specific and imaginative with your search terms, even if you feel a little weird typing that in. Ask yourself who is not included and literally make a list of the people you would like to include. Slow down. This is such a big one. Even a couple of extra minutes of searching can result in a much better photo. So rather than just choosing the first one you see, taking some extra time and running the images by somebody with a different identity than you to see what they think. And then challenge stereotypes, make unexpected choices, and they'll make your work more interesting. Like with Kids Count, we featured all different types of people. We tried to sort of counter all of the stereotypes that we were thinking about, and it resulted in a really interesting and special piece. And we have a link that we can put in the chat to download this checklist of how to intentionally choose inclusive images that we've created at Brevity and Wit. And that's it. We have about 12 minutes for questions and any thoughts we welcome in the chat. Thank you so much.
So we have a number of questions coming in. Acacia, Minal, John, whoever wants to jump in at these, I'm going to try to go after them. Gang, just so you know where I'm looking, 2 quick pieces of information. One, we're going to go to office hours in about 5 minutes or so. And so we'll put a link in there and people will be able to ask their questions directly. We ask you to ideally put your cameras on so you can talk directly like we're having an actual conversation. But for now, please go into the Q&A box at the bottom of Zoom here. There's about 12 questions here. You can vote for them. Even if you don't have a question, you can take a look through and choose the ones that you are most keen to hear answered. And so I'm going to start with the one that Karen puts to us. Karen Adams asks, regarding John's comment, this was earlier on, about the large review board at AECF. What type of foundational understandings do you need to establish with the group before review time begins? John, maybe this is first to you and then to our team from Brevity and Wit.
Yeah, sure.
How did that group come together at Annie Casey? What did they talk about? What were some of the agreements before you got underway?
So, we all kind of have the same kind of culture and understanding of what equity and inclusion means to us. So we don't kind of have to have those foundational conversations. And so often it's, just kind of getting feedback or like, this photo makes me uncomfortable, or I really love this photo. And it's just giving us a sense of like what direction to go into. And of course, in certain things, like if the office of the president flags an issue as a photo is problematic, we all understand that we take that much more seriously than we would like a program person or whatever. We value everyone's opinion, but there are the realities there. So I also think they understand that strategic communications will have the final decision. And so they're just providing input, and we know that.
So just to play the devil's advocate here, is there ever been an issue with the board where there's been some kind of conflict? And could you share what that looked like?
Yeah, so I think there was a photo of, like, I think we said in one of the photos, of a child with a disability, like arms were missing, and the child was very, very joyful. And I think there's a really important conversation to have about, like, people with disabilities deserve to experience joy, but at the same time, that felt like a juxtaposition that made some of our review board a little uncomfortable. And so we worked with Brevity and Wit to find a different photo with disability. And so that's the kind of conversation and back and forth that we were having. And we know that next year we'll try it again and see if we can make it happen. You know, we have to be instigators.
Well, that's a nice thing too, because you all get another bite of the apple every single year. So over time, it's really incredible to see all that you've done over a span of time. The next question that comes in is from an anonymous attendee, but everybody wants to hear the answer. And it reads, one of our consultants has advised against using photos that show folks who are happy or smiling, particularly in fundraising appeals, because supposedly the stats and research show it drives in less money when you see happy people in a fundraising appeal. But they continue, I don't want to show people, particularly immigrants, in such a vulnerable state. I'd love any insights you have on regarding what to use in fundraising appeals. So are there any good Acacia, any good rules here?
Yeah, so I'll take that question and offer an example that I'll throw into the chat from Doctors Without Borders. They had they used to do fundraising by showing white people helping Black and brown people, even though the majority of their staff in the field is Black and brown. And they did this video like,
I've seen this video, gang. You should click on it. It is wonderful.
It is, and I'm sure they'll offer it in the resources. And they really started to question this. And so what I'll say is that, and they talk about how, yes, it is possible that we may make less money. But what I offer to you all, and so this is the radical thought that I'm going to offer you all. We talk a lot about the ethics and equity in how we spend money, but we don't talk enough about the ethics and equity in how we earn money. Meaning, if your fundraising is predicated on supporting white supremacy and Black and brown people as helpless, then you have to question, how clean is that money then that you've gotten? And so it may mean that you get less money, but it's cleaner. Right. And so from a DEI perspective, that's like holistic and looking at your whole organization, you have to be willing to question whether your fundraising is doing more harm or more good in the world, and be willing to test that. Now, that being said, it's not, black or white. There are nuances and ways to make appeals that also feature people with dignity. And Trabian Shorter's work in asset framing can help illuminate that.
If folks are looking for Trabian, I sent a link in. ComNetwork DEI has a number of resources, including a fantastic case study from Trabian. And if you need more resources, just shout. We're happy to point them to you. Ann Haddad has a really interesting question, and we spoke about this in the planning. Maybe this is a good place to surface this for everybody. And the question is there something about stock photos in general versus hiring a photographer to take photographs of real people that either corrects the disparity or perpetuates it? So this was something you all were discussing during the pandemic, right? That was sort of what drove the decisions here. But are stock photos preferable to going out and hiring a photographer? Do y'all have a strong opinion on this one way or the other?
So for me, this is John. It's about like resources a little bit. So say like, I'm in the city of Baltimore. We have a very, very small Native American population, if any, a somewhat small Asian population. And many of the programs that are in our city that we work with or fund are often serving children of color. So we could send out photographers all out throughout the city, and we're still not going to get the diversity we need. And so it's easier to spend a couple hours searching stock photo sites than it is trying to coordinate in-person photo shoots of programs. So I say that's the kind of the benefit of it.
Yeah, and I mean, the reality of the situation is that we have limited budgets, right? Like every client of ours has funding set aside for photos. And sometimes, especially with smaller nonprofits or that sort of thing, they might not have any money to spend on stock photos. And so there are so many stock photos out there that keep getting better and better, particularly within the last few years. It does take time to search through them, but the reality is that a custom photo shoot is really expensive and takes a lot more time. Now, it's my dream to have like a very diverse and inclusive photo shoot, sourcing people of all different identities. And I will say, if you do that, just have really thoughtful, in-depth discussions with your photographer about those subtleties of how people are posed, how people are showing up in the compositions, who is being literally centered and why, because the photographers have a responsibility to all of this too.
Sandy Kendall has a great question. A number of folks were interested in the answer. Curious how you adapt your approach or your thinking to diversity and representation in situations where you might only have 1 or 2 photos in a publication, sort of thinking about that movie poster moment. And John, actually to you, was this something you all do with the Kids Count? When you're releasing it, is there one central image that you all use to sort of promote the book? And then there's everything else ancillary. But talk to us a little bit about what happens when you're producing something, but you really know maybe there's one hero image that's going to go out on digital or whatever it may be, or it's a real short piece and you're only going to have 1 or 2 bites at the apple. How do you manage that?
Yeah, so with the data book, it's, I think the cover is really that image that gets shown the most. It's what we think sets the tone. It's where the design motif that's going to be carried throughout the book appears. So I think that's really important to us. But then we also, we do like a lot of other things. So we have like blogs on our website, and we do like 10 to 15 new blogs per month. And so when we look at like all of those posts over a month, we can then go through and like look at the representation there. So with one publication and only a couple photos, you are limited, but I think but how does it look across 5 publications that each have 2 photos? And so I think you just kind of have to pull back a little bit and look at your diversity from that angle.
Yeah, and you're not, I mean, even in one data book where I think we have a couple of dozen photos, maybe, you're still not going to represent the full diversity that humans can have, right? And so I think if you only have 1 or 2 photos to feature, that conversation about who's going to appear in those photos and why becomes even more important. And a single person is not diverse, right? So if you're featuring just a photo of someone, you're not going to capture everybody, but figuring out, okay, well, who should it be and why, and who typically isn't featured and why aren't they, and how can we highlight them in a dignified light, that becomes even more important when you don't have a group of photos to work with. But you're right, especially like the organization, what you're producing and who you're featuring over time with each piece becomes even more important as well.
Oops, I muted myself here. John, I think this goes to you, but curious if others have thoughts here. Kim Burns has a great question, which is, do you all have a style guide at ANEKC or any other kind of organizational document or principles that are guiding how you think about the use of imagery or language? Many organizations have style guides. Is this a piece of what y'all do at ANEKC, or is this just part of a practice for this particular project?
No, so we have a style guide. We have an editorial style guide and then a visual style guide. The photos, it's more just kind of like, I would say, like broad guidance and not necessarily as specific as we've gotten into today. So we could definitely modify that. But we're using a style guide in everything we do.
Gotcha. Thank you very, very much. All right, gang. Hey, listen, we're right up at the top of the hour. I do want to say thank you again to Teresa for providing ASL services and for bearing with my motor mouth. Mental, Acacia, and John, thank you all very, very much. You've probably seen from the comments, tremendous amount of appreciation from across the community. And we're not done, gang. We're actually going to go over to office hours. So hopefully in just a moment or two, and I'll stick around until everybody does, we're going to put a link into the chat. You'll be able to join us in another Zoom. So you're going to close this out, go to a new Zoom, and all of us will be there. We're happy to answer any more questions you might have. And I know we didn't get to all of them, so chances are there's a few more. And for those folks who are asking, yes, this is being recorded. It will be on the network's YouTube channel or platform, whatever we're going to call it. Give us, Kareem's fast. Could be in the next couple of hours, but at the bare minimum, between now and let's say Friday, so within 48 hours, this will be up and available. And we'll be sharing it on social as well. So if you need another crack at the apple, I don't think that's the apple. In any event, we will see you online for office hours in just a minute, and there's the link. So see you all over there. See you soon. Safe and well, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.